Hello, welcome to Newscast. Now, Chris, one of the sidebars to the government's big environmental policies this week was that there will never be 7 recycling bins. Rishi Sunak's putting a stop to it, but we're never sure if there was ever going to be a start to it.
It was written down in the corner of a bit of legislation that this was an idea that local authorities might want to look at, but it wasn't obligatory. And so into that mix, newscaster Dave sent us this from Cheltenham.
We already have 7 bins. Let me show you. Brown bin, garden waste. Green bin, regular waste. Small green bin, food waste. Blue bag, cardboard. Then we have the recycling boxes. We have to separate out paper in one of them, tin cans and plastic in another, and glass in another. That's the big 7.
That's the kind of newscaster contribution we revere. Thank you, Dave. We've checked with the local authority in Cheltenham, and actually you can have 7 bins, as Dave has. You don't have to. There is some discretion for householders as far as what they decide to do, which gets to the crux of the extent to which Rishi Sunak was saying he was kind of scrapping this, given that technically it never kind of existed as an obligation. It was an option.
And if you scan the QR code that's on your screen now, that will take you to an app called Discord, where you will be able to join in the Newscast Discord server, where you can talk about everything that's happening in the news and on this podcast, and send us videos of your bins or whatever you want, whatever newsworthy subject you fancy. And we've been talking about this for too long now, so let's get on with this episode of Newscast, which will feature, in honour of the 7 bin story that never was, 7 Newscast mugs scattered around the table.
That's why there's so many.
Big budget.
Newscast. Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And it's Chris in the studio.
And to keep us company, we're joined by Ava Santina from Politics Joe. Hello again.
Hello.
And Cleo Watson. I mean, so many strings to your bow. Author, radio documentary maker, advisor to 2 prime ministers, including Boris Johnson.
Yeah, it's a litany of failures, isn't it, really?
Well, I mean, the book did well.
That's true. I've nearly finished my second one, so
Okay.
yeah, you'll have to deal with that in due course. But
Is it
it's
another...
it's about a general election, but it's very much along the same themes, but it brings in political editors on coaches going around the country and all kinds of...
Is there a bonking political editor in it?
I can't say.
That might be. Also, you worked with Alok Sharma when he was president of COP26, the big climate change conference in Glasgow. So I'm sure you've got lots of thoughts about net zero as well.
Well,
You know what? Pause them, because actually the breaking news we got this afternoon, which every journalist went, ooh, when they got it, was that Rupert Murdoch is stepping down as chairman of his many companies that run his newspapers and TV channels. And we can chat about it now because we're joined by a former employee of Rupert Murdoch. It's Kelvin McKenzie, who is editor of The Sun. Hi, Kelvin.
Yeah, and fired by Rupert, and he invested in my businesses. So I've had 40 up and down years with him.
Yeah, you can say that again. Did you think there was ever going to be a day where he'd kind of resign willingly and kind of quietly and orderly? Or did you think maybe it would end in a more kind of dramatic way? Or maybe even he'd, like some fictional characters, like die in the job?
I thought that was more likely. He did say to me on a number of occasions, they'll have to carry me out with my boots on. And clearly in his statement, which is most unhelpful, I'm Lachlan Murdoch, he basically says, I'm still going to have a day-to-day grip on the company, which actually is not good news for the shareholders, actually, because Rupert, I know it's the opposite of what people think. He's actually a cautious guy, but then when he makes up his mind, he really goes for it. And an enormously clever guy and an enormously cunning guy. So I was surprised. I was surprised that he was going to actually say he was handing over power, but wasn't handing over power. But he has been brilliant. I mean, I don't think people really get the concept of when he bought the Times, I think in 1979, it was losing money then. It was all over the place. He has dropped £2 billion in the last 40 years before getting it to profitability about 3 years ago. No other entrepreneur, no other business person would have done that. They would have moved it on after 10 years or 20 years. They would have stayed with it for a while. They were not losing money. Nobody in business loses money for 40 years. He gritted his teeth, stayed with it. And because of its profitability today, thanks to the subscription world and not through the ad-funded world, it means that it's probably worth at least what he's lost in it, and in the future is going to be worth a lot more. So for no other reason at all, the Times remains a great product and likely to get stronger over the years, thanks to the fact that he gritted his teeth on it.
Kelvin, what is it that motivates Rupert Murdoch?
Work, financial success, power. He loves power. I mean, the fact is that politicians...
Wielding power or being close to power?
It is actually... it's a strange combo of working out... Right, first of all, there is one phrase which sums up Rupert Murdoch. It's lower the lifeboat, I'm in. Wives, out the door. Children, out the door. Executives, out the door. He is an individual, right? He is a loner, okay? That's something that people don't kind of get, you know. He's a loner, actually, who's now gone profoundly, quite deaf, right? You can imagine. So inside, he lives entirely in the world of his own personality. So if he thinks it's in his commercial interest to do something, he will do it, no matter what the price is. If his happiness emotionally is not living with that lady, then that's the end of that.
Cleo, you've been on a lot of campaigns, not just elections, but referendums. Were the people running those campaigns kind of desperate to get Rupert Murdoch's endorsement, or how did it work?
Well, I was actually going to ask Kelvin a similar question because obviously everyone knows how in 1997, Alistair Campbell and Tony Blair flew out to Australia to try and get Rupert Murdoch to back Labour, and indeed he did, and they won their landslide in 1997. And I think there's still a lot of mystique anyway around politicians that he is incredibly influential and you want the Times and the Sun and whoever else backing you. But particularly with the rise of more kind of a much more kind of diverse media landscape, do you think that the Murdoch empire still has that same kind of clout?
Kelvin?
No, is the answer. No. And actually, I would say that had probably been true this last 15 years, you know, certainly the last 13 years.
Kelvin, thank you very much.
Cheers.
Ava, working on Politics Joe, which is a very modern digital product, does all of this chat, never mind sounding like from 40 years ago, does it sound like it's from 140 years ago to you?
Well, I think in the last sort of maybe 5 years, there's been this explosion, the age of information, and people are looking away from traditional legacy media and they're sort of looking around to kind of get a broader picture. So I don't think necessarily it's that people aren't picking up a newspaper anymore, why it doesn't have the influence, but actually there's this move, this slight distrust that the public now have in the tabloids and in broadsheets. And so they're looking around to video. I'm not saying they're looking to Politics Joe necessarily, but they are looking online at a broader spectrum rather than what, you know, not at papers that Kelvin would have had the influence over years ago.
Right, let's talk about another big issue this week. Cleo hinted at it. Chris, your big scoop about net zero. We've been talking about this for a couple of days now. Where do you think things have settled down now, particularly now that we've actually heard quite a lot from Rishi Sunak rather than your excellent leak about what Rishi Sunak was going to say?
Yeah, so, I mean, what's quite striking, a couple of things. So we got a leak on Tuesday afternoon, which we reported at 6 o'clock on Tuesday night, about what they were considering, what the Prime Minister was considering doing. We were very careful in our reporting of it that that's what he was considering. It wouldn't necessarily match with what he then said out loud, particularly after a leak where you might, as a Prime Minister, change as a result of the reaction that leak generates. What was quite noticeable was when he did stand up on Thursday afternoon, pretty much he did say what had been leaked to us. But what I was struck by...
Wednesday afternoon.
It's
been a long week for you, I can tell.
What did I say then?
You said Thursday, which is today.
What I thought was striking was that, yes, there was a lot of criticism from people with platforms and megaphones and PR departments, from the National Trust to Ford to E.ON, the energy company. But once the Prime Minister actually said what he said, it wasn't that the criticism went away, but I thought it was noticeably more nuanced. And now, Rishi Sunak knew he didn't know this was going to leak, and he was mighty annoyed that it leaked. But he knew when he presented his ideas, it would cause a row. And he knew it would cause a row in his own party, which it has, and then a wider row. But this is the start of this new autumn strategy of them being more political with a big P, more aggressive, leaning into stuff a bit more, and as he and those around him see it, being a bit more him, rather than steadying the ship over the last year, dealing with the pandemic when he was Chancellor, seeing him for the Conservative he thinks he's always been, but that circumstances up until now have constrained him from being.
Ava, one of the big things in the Rishi Sunak speech was like, I want to do politics differently and be more honest with people, and I want more nuance. Do you think he's got any chance of achieving that, or even sticking with that as an idea?
That was the point of the speech that frightened me, because that to me is an election speech. That is like snap election incoming. And if you speak to any Labour backbencher at the moment, they're really fired up about this. I mean, Barry Garden has just recalled the Environmental Audit Committee. That's a select committee in Parliament, and they're going to be scrutinising this legislation on Monday, or proposed legislation. And the reason he's doing that is because he genuinely believes that the Conservatives are now going to call a snap election in November, because I suppose it was a thought that a few of us had at the time, which is, why on earth would Rishi Sunak suddenly do this big grandiose speech out of nowhere, seemingly ripping up, weeks, years of policy? For what good reason, other than to perhaps make him more favourable to the electorate?
But what's wrong with that? I mean, it's a popularity contest, isn't it, politics? He wants to win an election. And there's going to be an election in the next, year-ish, plus or minus a few months.
Yeah, I think that, being a stickler for parliamentary procedure, I would say that should have been introduced in the Commons, and MPs should have been allowed to scrutinise it properly.
Cleo, what's as a former insider professional, somebody who's worked on many speeches and rollouts of things like this, what's your review of how this week went?
Well, obviously, Chris has
ruined it.
ruined it. But in an ideal world, they'd have had a few days to everyone's talking about pitch rolling, but that is the term.
Basically getting everyone ready, softening the ground.
You'd speak to the head of Ford and E.ON and people like that. You'd get all these businesses sorted. You'd get your own party squared off. Although I do kind of admire that he doesn't seem that concerned, actually, about the different wings of his party. And I think that's quite refreshing. I think we're all quite tired of the party system where leaders are constantly having to pander to one side or the other and hold their coalition together. They'd have had much more time to scrutinise exactly what they said. So he might not have got into meat taxes and 7 bins and so on if they'd been able to really scrutinise exactly what they were saying. And obviously he'd get to polish the speech that he gave as much as possible. He'd have had ministers ready to go out and give interviews and basically get everybody prepared, including the CCC and Lord Deben, to make sure exactly, and maybe put in a call to Alok Sharma, who I know you're speaking to later, who's in New York, and
wake him up in the middle of the night.
Yeah, exactly, just to soften the blow, because as Chris said, the leak was kind of the worst bit, and then when he started talking, it does feel like people have, well, he's had an opportunity to explain himself a bit, and the main thing is he's taken a position here.
What still confuses me after a couple of days, and Chris, maybe you can help me out with this, is that the whole theme of Rishi Sunak's speech was, I've got to be honest with people about the hard choices, which normally sounds like, your bills are going to go up, or you're going to pay more tax, or you're going to get less nice things. He then sort of delaying a target for something and watering down, in some people's words, the targets of some other things. That's not being honest about a hard choice, is it? That makes it easier. So where's the hard choice and the honesty here?
Well, I suppose the hard choice element was that he knew it was going to provoke a row, and here's a man who spent
hard choice for him.
Well, he spent the last year, for understandable from his perspective, party management reasons, not provoking rows, because if you are running a party that's just had a civil war for pretty much the entirety of the calendar year before, then the first thing you've got to do is prevent that happening again. So he spent a year avoiding those wherever he could, to the point where any flashpoint that was going to arise in the Commons, MPs were called in, various sort of compromises were made, and it never came to it. It was all about hosing down even the merest flicker of a flame. And so you've got to the point in the last 6 months where there aren't people like me on the telly every night saying, I wonder if the government's going to last the next week, which we were doing throughout 2022. because the answer to it is it will. That's a kind of necessary baseline, if you like, for a party to be able to start, campaigning and making a pitch. But look at the polls; it doesn't look like it's remotely sufficient. So now the strategy in Downing Street is we've got to do a bit more.
Rishi Sunak hinted, he actually said there's going to be more to come, where I'm going to change the direction of the country and tell you more hard truths and make tough decisions. Any clues about what other things are on his list?
Yeah, I've been trying to find this out. I mean, the first and most obvious one, because the government is not offering a straight answer to this particular question at the moment, is HS2, the high-speed rail line, and whether the second phase of it, Birmingham to Manchester, or the line between those two cities, goes ahead on the current time frame or even goes ahead at all. And at the moment, ministers just simply will not answer those questions. So that is there. The hint that's coming out of government seems to be a timing issue. They keep talking about phasing, which is sort of Whitehall language for delay. So let's see. So that's one. The other one is the European Convention on Human Rights. I'm not saying, we know what the policy is at the moment, and it's to stay within it. And if a party in government was to advocate withdrawal and to try and attempt withdrawal, it would be mighty controversial. Brexit Mark II, as somebody described it to me, it's written into all sorts of bits of legislation, not least the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. But there are some Conservatives who would love to see that happen. So those two things that I was just sort of throw out there. Who knows? By the way, I think the HS2 question they're going to have to answer, and it looks like they're on the move on that one. ECHR one is more of a question mark. So they're just two of a few of things that would have, I think, depending on exactly how far you went as a party, the same capacity to cause one of these rows as we've seen this week that discombobulates and forces Labour to work out where it's going to be and grabs the agenda and grabs those headlines that will make the press digest in Downing Street and all of that, and would be part of, or if you like, a further case study in this sort of more muscular thing that they're keen to do.
Okay. Well, Ava, we'll find out pretty soon if your prediction of a November election this year is going to come true. Thank you very much. Good job. You just said it in private, not on TV on a podcast.
But at least conference season will be a doddle, so that'll be nice for you all, won't it?
Wouldn't it?
And Cleo, thank you very much too.
Pleasure.
Right, let's chat now to Sir Alok Sharma, who is president of the COP26 climate change conference held in Glasgow in 2021, but he's currently in New York for another climate conference. Hello, Alok.
Hi, Adam. Great to be on. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, welcome back. A bit of transatlantic action on Newscast tonight. So you're at this climate action conference. What's it been like being there as a British person, surrounded by lots of presumably climate action people, as the UK seems to be taking maybe a bit less action on the climate?
Well, look, I mean, the UK actually has been a leader on climate action, certainly historically. And it is the case. We have decarbonised our economy faster than any other G7 nation in recent years. And, over the time that I did COP and, the work I guess I'm doing now, people do ask in other governments, how is it that the UK has managed to decarbonise so quickly? What are the lessons to be learned? So that, of course, is very positive. So I think the reaction in terms of what, with the Prime Minister's speech, I think was a combination of concern and actually puzzlement. They've seen the UK lead on this issue over a long period of time, and I think they want us to continue to lead. We've talked about this previously, Adam. Is that the UK, because we showed ambition ourselves domestically going into COP26, we were able to get other countries to act. I mean, I personally sat there with ministers, leaders from G20 nations, and we did manage to get to go from 30% of the global economy covered by a net zero target to 90%. We got commitments from business. All of that was possible because we ourselves were ambitious and we had shown ambition. And I think there was some of the conversations I had, there was also this sort of concern that, was this the precursor to further taking the foot off the pedal? So I think what I think everybody wants to see and hear is a positive message, a positive vision. The Prime Minister said he's going to COP28. I really welcome that. And I think it'll be great for him to set out a positive vision about how the UK will continue to lead in this area.
Okay, you say concern. I'm trying to just get a gauge of how concerned people are about this. Is that like, oh, have I burnt the toast? Or is that, oh, the house is burning down level of concern? Which end of the scale?
Well, it certainly isn't the toast is burnt. I think naturally what happens, once you've done a COP, people see that perhaps you're not able to do as much because you're not in that position. But nevertheless, the UK retains that leadership. We've got fantastic diplomats around the world. We've got great civil servants in the UK doing this work. And so there was pretty sort of serious concern, some pretty frank views expressed to me around the direction of travel, and that's why I think it's important that further messages that come out of the government are positive. They are demonstrating that the UK is going to continue to lead, and that we're going to continue to be sort of forward-looking as a nation on this issue.
Pretty frank expressions of views, you said there, Sir Alok. That usually translated means people were absolutely furious. I wonder who these people were.
Well, the conversations I've had were private conversations, Chris. I mean, just to say that there's sort of range of views that were expressed, and I think it sort of ranges from sort of quite a lot of concern to actually puzzlement, where people are trying to understand where the UK is. Are we still in a leadership position? And what we do absolutely matters. We are one of the biggest economies in the world. Here at the UN, we are a permanent member of the Security Council. People respect the UK, and they want to see us to continue to lead on this agenda.
Has brand Britain taken a hit this week?
I think it's been tough for brand Britain. I think it's been tough for brand Britain here at the Climate Ambition Summit. But we just have to now sort of pull ourselves, pull the socks up and demonstrate that we still care about this issue, and that we are willing to lead. And as I said, I go back to this point about I'm really pleased the Prime Minister confirmed that he's going to COP28, because literally the eyes of the world will be on us. They'll be on every nation at COP28. And I think what the Prime Minister says will absolutely matter, particularly in this issue in terms of brand Britain, global Britain, as we've talked about in the past.
Yeah, he just slipped that fact about going to COP28 in the UAE into his speech, and I sort of noticed it because he had to sort of dragged to COP27 last time. Now, this stuff like the back of your hand. What difference does it actually make to the buying behaviour of the British public if the ban on the sale of petrol and diesel cars moves back 5 years to 2035? Just talk me through what you think that actually does. Because I'm sure I read something in the Climate Change Committee report earlier in the year saying that actually sales of electric cars had exceeded their expectations just anyway.
Look, I think the issue is that, and we do have to be upfront about this, is that delaying some of these policies actually ends up adding extra cost. Adam, you talked about the Climate Change Committee. They brought out a report previously which said that if the phase-out date was 2035, it would mean billions extra in terms of costs ultimately for consumers. You will also see the second-hand market, which then helps to drive down the price of electric vehicles, develop at a slower rate. We may not get to price parity between electric vehicles and petrol and diesel as quickly. And there is one other issue in this, which is around those folks who are currently training to be charge point engineers, or people looking to train to install heat pumps. If you're in that position now, you must be thinking, am I making the right decision about the career that I want to pursue? All I'm saying to you is that I think this has not been great in terms of the signals to the auto sector, particularly. You've seen the reaction. Secondly, from a cost point of view, I think it ultimately ends up adding extra cost of consumers. And thirdly, electorally, again, this is my opinion, is that I'm not sure that this will necessarily help.
It sounds
just
like very politely,
cost,
you're saying he's spectacularly kind of misread the room, misread the politics.
I'm no longer in government, so I'm able to speak out, frankly, on these issues. I just want to just go back to this issue of cost. I also welcome the fact that there is a boiler upgrade scheme, and I think the grant is going up to £7,500 from £5,000 to fit a heat pump. That's great. I really welcome that. But the current value of that fund is £450 million. In the 6 months to March of this year, the government provided £40 billion of support to households, to businesses, to help them manage with the cost of bills. And that was absolutely the right thing to do. But just imagine if we had invested at that sort of scale in prior years, and we had helped people to insulate their homes, if we'd helped them to make energy efficiency measures, we'd helped them to upgrade their heating, they would now be facing lower bills. We would also be ensuring at the same time that less energy was being used, and consequently, we would see less emissions. So, the decisions that governments take have consequences for the long term.
Oh, Alok, if only you'd been a government minister and could have influenced that. Oh, hang on. There you are. Now, also...
Well, I haven't been for a while, Adam, as you know.
Yeah, but no, you were at that period, though, weren't you? Before pre-COP, when decisions were being made about because cancelling insulation schemes was done years before, and they could have done that years ago.
Yeah, but actually, I mean, just go back to this point on the EVs. I was business secretary when that decision was announced in I think it was November 2020, where we had a 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, and I had lots of conversations with the auto sector. And they welcomed the clarity on the 2030 date. We were also providing funding in terms of rolling out charging stations and with gigafactories, etc. So even at that point, it was very clear that the auto sector was accepting of this direction of 2030, and that's what they've also said more recently, and of course, subsequent to this speech.
And also, Alok, I remember you're veggie, aren't you?
I do not eat meat.
Oh, what's the difference?
Well, I will occasionally eat some fish.
Oh, okay. Would you urge more of us to become vegetarian? Because actually, you could urge people to eat less meat instead of taxing meat, couldn't you? Not that we're going to tax meat now, because that's another thing that's been pre-cancelled by the government.
I think we may have discussed this previously. Look, my view is that this is down to people's personal choice, right? You decide what makes sense for you. And I've never been someone who says, we should be coercing people and sort of, telling them this is exactly what they ought to be doing. I've always been someone, you talked about me being in government. When I was in government, I was always very keen on, carrot rather than stick approach. Look, it's up to every individual to look to see, what lifestyle choices they make. But the one thing we do know is that there are a lot of people who care about this issue, and they will come to their sort of own conclusions on these. The only other thing that I would just say on this is that the issue on sort of taxing meat, etc. I mean, none of this stuff was obviously in the net zero strategy. I mean, this wasn't government policy.
Alok, thank you very much for filling us in, and safe travels.
Thank you so much.
Chris, thanks to you too for keeping me company in the studio.
Thank you. It's good to be back in the TV studio on a Thursday night.
And if you like watching us, you can listen to us every day now, because we're 7 days a week on BBC Sounds. And we'll be back here on your TV screens very soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Newscast. Newscast. Newscast from the BBC.
Discover unique stories,